I was employee number 16, and my wife was employee number 21. We met at DeLorean. That's the background to my period of time there. I was employed as, supposedly, as purchasing manager for the place in England, an office in England. Didn't work out that way at all. For the first 6 months I spent in Dunbury, Monday to Friday, and then after that it was 2 days a week in Dunbury, 2 days a week at Lotus, I'll tell you about that in a second, and 1 day a week in Coventry. So much for 7 days a week in Coventry. It didn't work out like that at all. I had 20 guys working for me in Coventry, and they had the same problem. They didn't spend much time there. But my role was to interface with Lotus with regard to the car and to determine what the engineers wanted in terms of assistance, because clearly Lotus were making 3 cars a day for the Esprit and maybe 2 cars a day for the Clark. So there was hardly high production tooling. So my job was to find a solution to any of the components on the car. Once we found a solution, is to find a supplier. Example, the fuel tank. The fuel tank initially would be mild steel, like everybody else's fuel tank. But you know better than I do that fuel tanks corrode from the inside rather than the outside. So that was out of the question, because we had this ethical policy on materials. So the next idea was a stainless steel tank. No, couldn't do that because there was no expertise in welding stainless steel. There was some knowledge of pressing it, but not in welding it. The nearest thing we could think of that was welded in stainless steel was a beer barrel. And that's hardly a positive. The next one was, came up with, which didn't last very long, was a bladder, like you use in helicopters. Firestone in the US now stopped producing bladders. The Vietnam War ended in '75. We're talking about '78 now. So we obtained a bladder, then you have to have something to hold it. And it became cumbersome. So the next idea was a blow-molded tank. So we looked around at people who could make blow-molded tanks, and there was 2, 3. There was only one car with a blow-molded tank on the road worldwide, and that was a Renault 4. So, yeah. So we thought, well, we need to find somebody that knows about tanks. That was Alfred Nobel, blow-molding rather. That was Alfred Nobel. The guys in France that made the Renault 4, a place called STMP, really didn't have the knowledge and expertise. So that's the sort of job we did. It wasn't just doing the price and placing the order. We did the research. And don't forget now, in '78, we didn't have a laptop. We didn't have computers. We didn't have the internet. So if somebody says to you, go and find me a blow-molded tank supplier, what do you do? I spent hours down the library just going through directories. And that's the way we did it. Some simpler stuff, pressings and so on, we knew guys who did big pressings, small pressings and so on. The front and rear end, reinforced rim. We came up, the guy said, well, we need something at the rear end. It's going to be reinforced. It's going to be plastic, they said. And we knew by plastic they meant reinforced rim. Who makes that sort of component? And there were about 3 contenders. And the best one we found, I was sent over to see them in Hamburg, a place called Phoenix, or pronounced Phoenix. Phoenix Rubber Company. And they made the Porsche front and rear end. So we thought, that's a good bet. There was no pricing involved. We didn't say, hey, what's your price for this? Because we hadn't designed it. We asked them at that stage, all these suppliers, to go and talk to the engineers and see what they want in terms of design, and you can help them. So that's the way my job works. And then take that knowledge back to Dunbury and talk to the production engineers and say, this is a low molded tank, and they'll say, what's one of them? So you then explain what's one of them to them, and that went on and on. So they could do the jigs and the fixtures. The trick here now is that we were building a facility, a building, a plant, that we didn't know what was going in. We just didn't know. The body shop, if those of you familiar with the photograph from imagining on the screen there, it's got a big hump in the middle. That's for ERM presses, which we never bought, we never used. We used a couple of ERM parts, but the big hump in the press shop was for ERM presses. But we didn't know anything else. The other thing that was interesting is we thought the next guy to us knew everything, and actually we knew nothing. So things like what's the height of an average tailgate dock for the truck, so the builders could design the ramp that goes down. We didn't know, so you need to find out. Go on the internet. No internet. So you have to find out. Then you have to find out the latitude of trucks, big and small ones. Where do you go? Down the library or talk to your mates in transport. What's the regulation with regard to using gasoline indoors? We don't know. We thought you didn't know. No, I don't know. So we then talked to our colleagues in the big motor companies, Ford and Chrysler, and asked them because they have the same problem. So that's the way the job worked, is finding out legislation as well as doing the procurement and selection of suppliers. Pricing wasn't a lot of it, to be honest. Pricing came last because Lotus were not familiar with these processes. We weren't familiar ourselves. So we had to give somebody who knew everything about the product, the process they used. So and when we got the design, we'd say, what's the price? And then we'd negotiate. And to be honest, I don't think we were ripped off too many times. Now and again, I think we were. I know the parts where we were, and I still hold a grudge against that supplier, even 40 years later. The other thing that we didn't have, apart from a laptop, computer, an Excel database, we didn't have a bill of materials. We didn't have anything, nothing. So my job when I first arrived in December 78 was to try and compile a broad bill of materials, a broad one. So I said, well, can I have a look at the car? No, you can't, we haven't got one. But there's a photograph. Would you like to? Well, I thought, well, I'll have a crack at this, because we knew every car generally has 4 wheels, with 2 big ones at the back and 2 small ones at the front. So you wrote out wheels, then tyres, then drive shafts, then suspension joints, radius arms, upper link, lower link, that sort of stuff, until you got broadly by cost. Oh, forgot the stainless steel. Broadly by cost, you got most of the parts, but you didn't have a design. So when the design was released, what we did was again computers. We got a card system. We got 4 boxes of cards, boxes, and we wrote out road wheel. Yes, we said every car has a road wheel. We download the design, we got a part number, put it down there, and go and get a price for it. Once you got a price and negotiating, you went to the next box. And when you're negotiating, got a tooling lead time, went to the following box. So the boxes went like this, but they often went the other way as well, as we redesigned the part. So that's the way we did it, and there was a lot of handcrafting of specifications. Excuse me. So that, I was then, while I was trying to do the bill of materials in December 78, and I said, I can't get very far with the photograph. I know it's got a screen, I know it's got wheels. What else has it got? It's very similar to the Esprit. So if I give you a plastic car kit, would you take it apart and then cost it with piece part cost and tooling as you assemble this little thing? And I'm not joking, it's what I did. So I took a Lotus Esprit car kit, and then broke it down, and I was really, this is a great job. They're paying me for this. I remember the day, I was day 2 of this, I remember the day that I was assembling it, back to my childhood, doing the gluing, and I thought, God, I really love it. And then I heard John DeLorean next to me in the office next door, talking to his maid in New York. So I dropped that. I thought, well, if he catches me, he won't know what I'm doing. He thinks I'm mucking about. So I put it away, and eventually I got a notice of spree parts book. I wish I hadn't done that, because there were 3,200 parts in there. And that's how many had roughly in your DeLorean. So we had a lot of cards, a massive amount of cards, but no computer, no database. A lot of it, I'd say, I'd boast about this, a lot of it was about memory. Because we worked so hard and so long, including weekends and holidays, there was nothing else to us that mattered, because everybody said we were going to fail. So we put the hours in to show the world that we weren't going to fail. But the big surprise came when I found out within a month of starting that John had promised the car in 18 months. So we were all a bit surprised about that, because the last car I worked on took 9 years. Well, actually, the car I worked on after, the Jaguar, was the XJ40, which took 9 years. And some other cars were taking 5 to 6 years, and John had promised it in 18 months. And there's a good reason for that, because if you went up to a politician and say, give me £54 million, roughly today, $400 million, and I'll get you a car in 18 months, and I'll employ 2,500 people. Gotcha. Yeah, we'll have some of that. If you said, oh, I'm sorry, it's not 18 months, it's 4 years, 5 years, you wouldn't have got that. We wouldn't have started the program. So he got the politicians pregnant on the idea of making a car. We ran out of money 3 times or 4 times, I think, and the government were getting really fed up with us. So the first date was the 1st of July 1979, probably slightly earlier than that. Then the 1st of January 1981. 1980 was the first day. 81, 1st of January. And we knew we weren't going to do that. And we just ran out of money. I remember the Christmas before, the second line management were my colleagues were superb. I used to think I was bright, but these guys were just on a different level. And we worked very closely together. There's the 3 of us, a guy called Harry Stedman, Martin Graham, and myself. And we worked very closely as manufacturing materials and me. And so, because we were failing on the 1st of January date, we told the government we were going to build cars on the 1st of January. Gene Kafiro sent a message to me, as the president of the company, to come to Belfast. I'd just broken 4 bones in the foot the day before, and his secretary said he didn't ask you about your health, he asked you to come to Belfast. Nice guy. Oh, by the way, this is the guy that invented the carrot and stick variation. He always forgot the carrot. So anyway, we sat in front of him in December 1980, and he tore through us. He really went bananas and said, "You're fired. Unless you can tell me now you will produce cars at this time, you're fired." And got up and left. And I went back home, got into the plane back home. So the first cars, I forget the numbers, they weren't ingrained on my mind. The first car was before, about the 15th of January. It wasn't the car that John drove out the factory. The 15th of January. And the second car was on the Monday, the 20th. The 2 cars on the 20th of January. And John drove out another car on the 21st. That's the one you see in the press. But there was another car that was supposed to be that car, but it crashed the day before. So we weren't having a lot of luck, but we did it. What I didn't know until years later is that in February there was a board meeting in Dunmurry, and it was the advice of the solicitor, company secretary, that we should wind the company up because we couldn't meet our financial objectives. So his advice, and I see somewhere in writing, that he's suggesting, and his own reputation's at stake, that we should wind up the company in February. We said, John DeLorean and the guy said, no, we're going to carry on, we're going to get money from the government. And we did get money from the government, got another 10 million, I think. So that's the first cars. The first cars were shipped in April. And then on May the 5th, we had somebody called it a small problem, but I'd call it more than that. We had a riot outside the gate. And somebody, and this is coincidence, somebody threw a petrol bomb and burned down a lot of the wooden shacks that we had to house the guys temporarily. All the drawings went, all the personnel records went, everything went. It wasn't a small fire. I bumped into a guy 2 weeks ago, and it's strange. And I was telling him about this story. He said, yes, I was on the other side of the fence rioting. And he said, he told me he was hit by a plastic bullet, he lost the sight of his eye, and he lost his hearing, and he lost parts of the movement of his jaw. And it's coincidence because he's a relative. That's the embarrassing thing.
Wow.
Relative of the wife. Nice guy, actually. So then the soldiers occupied the plant in the evening, and by 5 o'clock, the soldiers would come in quietly, lie on the floor in the training building, which I'm going to show you in a second. How long have I got?
Yeah, we got to work them on to get something. I'll work to flip the slides for you.
Would you like me to advance it for you?
Like to, if, no, it's okay. If we can start with that in a second. Just that one at the moment.
Sure. I'm going to scoot over here behind you.
So this was because the hunger strikers were on hunger strike, and they were dying one by one, and as they died, they were rioting in Belfast and around the plant. So the soldiers were there to protect the plant, and it was ironical to walk through or strange rather, to walk through the building to step over a soldier who's got a gun in his hand, and then get on the phone and give a supplier a Veronica. It was odd, it was pinch me. This isn't true, but it did happen. So towards the end, we built too many cars. John wanted to ramp up production, so his stock declaration would go up in value. We achieved about 40 cars a day by about August. And he said, no, you've got to go to 80 a day, which is the maximum capacity of the plant, which I'll show you in a moment. And we did. And by October, we were flat out at 80 cars a day. And then, unfortunately, the bottom fell out of it all because we couldn't sell them. It's a bad winter, apart from anything else. And we didn't know that this was happening. It was a gradual thing. So, and then we went into what was called receivership administration. You call it Chapter 11. Then there was an attempt to resurrect the company with Barry Wills, Chuck Bennington, myself, and 2 other guys, to introduce the TR8 as a dual product company. Everybody loved it except Margaret Thatcher, who said no, not under any circumstances. So that was the end. Just to show you, I usually start showing you this at the start of any presentation. You've probably seen it before. It's not mine, it's DeLorean Owners Club. It's Neil Barclay. You've got the sound on there.
Oh, sound.
The sound medicine.
All right, hold on.
Oh, falling!
Sounds so real.
It's gonna be loud. Uh-oh.
This is the test tank, by the way. I forgot to tell you that bit. This is Neil Barkley.
Can we go down there?
I've seen that 100 times. It's brilliant. Neil Barkley is a guy to believe is a big advocate of DeLorean man and car. They're from Belfast. He's a lovely guy. Right, this is, you can tell by the clothes, this is August, summer in Belfast.
Wow.
This is, it is August. That's the training building where I was based and the directors were based. The boardroom, if you see John in Dunmurry, it's in that building. So it's a 72-acre site. On the back of the site, there's a Catholic housing estate. On the other side, there's a Protestant housing estate. I'll tell you all about that in a second. Okay. Opening, I arrived at the company for the first time about 2 weeks after this. Thank you. That's a photograph courtesy of James Espy. That's quite, oh yeah. I'm not going to talk much about GPD because that's covered in the film. I don't want to spoil that. But that's the, if you go back. I found this, it's now erased from the website. I found it quite a few years ago. It's the Panama GPD money laundering activity that Lotus and John did. And it's dated 77, before John met, well, before the contract was arranged. John had met DeLorean, Colin Chapman had met DeLorean at least 2 years before that. So this was 1977. Okay. That's the training building. My office started off at the top, and as with my career, I slowly moved downwards to the end, to a broom cupboard. I'm not sure if that's in my cupboard. I'm not sure if that's the one. I don't think it is. But that's an example of what I've used to cost the car. It had a rear louver as well. Fairy tree is in the middle by the brook, which nobody would cut down. Dixon Hollins had told me he didn't cut it down. Somebody else cut it down because you'll go to hell forever if you cut a fairy tree down. And I certainly, having been in Belfast now for almost 40 years, I certainly wouldn't cut it down.
Do you have a suspect of who you think cut it down?
Somebody told me, Nick Mulholland, who's on the film Framing DeLorean, told me that there was a man that did cut it down, and later he lost a leg. Very careless. This is the training building, the wooden huts that somebody said are minor huts. They occupy something like about 200 people. You see it there. That's the training building.
What's in the bottom left corner?
Bottom left. Bottom left.
Those buildings. Neighborhood?
That's Twinbrook housing estate. My mother-in-law lived in one of those homes. Right. That's the new hi-fi system that Lotus were developing. It's measuring fuel consumption at Lotus. I've got a lot of photographs from that period from a guy called Paul Ficker, who's the engine man. Brilliant guy, absolutely lunatic. He really was, but he was brilliant at his job. He gave me that photograph. There's a layout of the plant. The body press, which I'm going to tell you about first, And then the assembly building, I'm going to touch on the emissions down. You go clockwise from 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock down and to dispatch. And the proving ground, we don't call it a test track, call it a proving ground. And the training building, top left, the gate at the top is an entrance, the gate at the bottom is an entrance. Yes, the Catholics, if you walk into work, you come through that gate. If you walk into work as a Protestant, you come through that gate. If you come in a car, you go through the middle gate. So, hence the myth is busted. Okay. Right, then we're going to start with the body shop first. These two containers and this. So those two containers and that. It's okay, you can do that. Those two containers on the left are polyol and isocyanate for the foam beams to go within the structure of the car. That other building is a resin farm, contains the MEKP, the catalyst, and the resin. And the tall roof in the middle of that building was to accommodate ERM presses, which never happened. Okay. It had to be something called continuous filament mat. The mat you buy in the store is chopped strand mat. That's continuous filament mat, and it's woven like that to give it strength in the very vacuum-assisted mould, because there's a lot of pressure there. If you chop strand mat, you split out, all you get is resin. So it was chopped strand, and it was quite expensive. It's a messy job then. That's the varied mouldings. Yeah. And each one had a male, top and the bottom had a male and female. So you had 4 shells altogether. A male and a female were mated for life like albatrosses. They were never parted. Maintenance took place on a Saturday. So if you wanted a modification on a tool on a body, this is why you get things out of sequence. You took a tool out, you modified it, put it back in. The next week you took another tool out. So if you find a VIN with something different, like a pontoon for instance, where we used woven mat, it was all over the place in terms of VINs. So that's the reason, because the tool had to be modified. The weight of the top shelf for memory is 35 kilograms, the bottom is about 50. That's what we call the fettling shop. We eventually moved to water. I think that's hydraulic. That's another messy job. Thank you. I think that's the heat oven, accelerated heating. Lotus use accelerated heating, then put the cars to one side for a week. But we couldn't do that with 80 a day, so we had to boost it up. Hence we got a bit of variation on the bodies. All the bodies were graded A to E. We got a lot of E's to start with, I'll tell you. And then we fed that back to the guys in the maintenance department to find a solution. Doors, I've never come across anything like it in my life. The misery from the time they're welded inner to outer to the time they're fitted on the line. Absolutely miserable. Okay. Now the body's already got the VIN allocated at this stage. It's not allocated on the assembly line. The body has a VIN number there. And it's ready to go into the assembly area. Thank you. That's the assembly area. There's 22 stations, I think. The doors are applied further down. Thanks. We put the doors on first because they're the most difficult to adjust. And if you go to the next one. The doors had a separate line to begin with, hence those bars down the bottom. That was a separate production line, so you're supposed to, as your car came along, you pick up your door and you put it on, just like that. It doesn't work like that at all. At all. Double key, yeah, we got used to that. A single key meant that you got to match that to the body that's coming down the line there. And if you get that wrong, you then have to change the lock. Hence you got VIN numbers crossed out at the top. If you see those, where you got a VIN number crossed out, another one means you got the door wrong. or you didn't make it quick enough, or the guy gave you the wrong information. It was a nightmare. Really was.
Yeah.
Tellus carriers, there's a Tellus tower there somewhere that guys it like an airport apron. They were pretty cute, those. I don't know why there's no doors on that car. I've been bothering me for 40 years, but gone. Tellus carrier should be there somewhere. There it is, top left, 10 o'clock. He's the guy that's controlling the movement of the Tellus carriers. Those are on stationary platforms because we probably run out of space. Okay. Yeah, and off you go. Perfect. Except it isn't. It now goes into another building called the EVP, Emissions and Vehicle Preparation. Vehicle preparation should have been the keynote, really, because they were basically reworked. A guy called Harry Stedman ran that shop. He's a brilliant guy. Never gave up. Always there. I thought he slept there. Yeah, brilliant guy. And he organised all of that area. And those who were taken into that area after the went round the proving ground. Car wash, we wish I hadn't invented a car wash, really. That's right. We had a lot of leaks, as you might imagine.
You still do.
Test track, very different to the one you've seen earlier with Neil Barker. Proving ground, rather, and a water spray. That's its take. I took that photograph. I took some reporters around a couple of years ago. The high fence on the side is slanted like that. And it's slanted for one good reason. It's not falling down. It was built like that because the kids from Twinbrook would throw stones at the cars if they came around the corner there. And it was to protect the cars from underneath the fence, to stop the bricks hitting them. Yeah. Right, okay. Our little fire, I'm not sure whose photograph that is, so my apologies, I can't recall. Our little fire. Interesting, that day, I arrived for work and there was a priest in the reception. I thought, I know we got bad cars, but goodness gracious. The priest, Father Mullen, who my wife knew very, very well, came to apologise for the rioting and said, we really need your place, we need your cask, we need your jobs, please give us another chance. That was Father Mullen. He actually baptised my daughter as well. Excellent. Saddest of all, really. I think that's a shot from a BBC film.